Thousands of years ago in tropical Mexico, a sculptor wipes the sweat from his brow. He, his apprentices, and other workmen have spent all night putting the finishing touches on a masterpiece. The work had devoured entire seasons of labor from the men, but they are thrilled to be at the end of a long process. It had been fraught from the beginning. Their benefactor and patron had been unable to source new material for the project, and he'd been left no choice but to secure material locally, no doubt a painful blow to his ego and reputation. Worse yet, the shape of the block had not been ideal. More material than expected would have to be carved off, and that would mean more time and a smaller sculpture. Their orders were clear, and they had their material, tools, models, and maquettes. Over the course of many months, a familiar face slowly emerged from the stone, liberated by the chisels and hammers of the workers. The sculptor now steps back to admire the work when suddenly a voice bellows behind them, and the surprised workmen suddenly put down their tools and stand. A high ranking noble, their patron, walks into the workshop. Rumor must have gotten out that the piece was nearing completion. The sculptor is proud of the work he and his men have done, but that's little consolation if the patron isn't pleased. Tension fills the air as he inspects the colossal head gazing at him. He smiles approvingly and congratulates the workers before departing the workshop. Everyone sighs in relief. They can finally rest easy knowing that the project is complete. All that's left is to move it into the plaza where it will stand proudly alongside the other regal faces of the city. This scene evokes the elite craftsmanship that the Olmec are renowned for. Colossal Olmec heads, massive stone altars, jade masks, and elegant ceramic figures are just a few of the calling cards of the Olmec. Olmec culture had a profound impact on Mesoamerica, so much so that in 1942, Mexican archaeologist Alfonso Caso dubbed them Mesoamerica's mother culture, the culture that bequeathed Mesoamerica a distinct iconography, monumental art, writing, the calendar, the ball game, and even chocolate. For better or worse, Caso's label has stuck in popular literature. As we'll see across these next two episodes, this narrative isn't quite so cut and dry. In fact, it may be better to think of the Olmecs as successful siblings rather than prodigious parents. In this first episode, we'll look at the rise of the Olmec to see where they came from and how they developed from humble origins to become master monument builders and city planners. Let's go. Before we launch into this roller coaster, let's address the elephant in the room. Why am I making an Olmec episode when I already have an Olmec episode, and a very successful one at that? If you haven't seen that episode and this doesn't matter to you, feel free to skip to the next chapter of the video. For those who demand an explanation, allow me to explain myself. When I started researching that episode, it was late 2019, I was still finding my footing, and I had no idea that Ancient Americas would ever grow into the channel that it is today. While I think that Olmec episode is mostly fine, there are several aspects that I've wanted to elaborate and clarify. While none of my videos are perfect, the Olmec are a very popular and important topic, and I want to make sure that viewers are getting the best information that I can reasonably provide. Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve a better Olmec episode, and today, armed with better sources and research, you are going to get it. Actually, we'll be doing two episodes on the Olmec, so this will be part one of two. If you're familiar with the older Olmec episode, you'll see that this one goes into much more depth than the last one. I actually unlisted that older episode, but if you're curious about what my content looked like back when I was just getting started, I'll have a link in the description if you want to watch it. With that cleared up, we need to get the who, when, and wheres out of the way. First off, let's discuss what we mean when we say Olmec, because this can have multiple meanings. Scholars and archaeologists have applied the term Olmec to the people and culture of the southern Gulf Coast lowlands during the period from 1500 to 400 BCE, and they are going to be our focus today. In some ways, Olmec is an unfortunate name because in historical sources, Olmec refers to completely different people. The word Olmec comes from the Nahuatl word Olmecat, which translates to rubber people. Their home, the Olmen, was a land known for its rubber trees and rubber products. These terms were used by the Mexica to refer to the southern Gulf Coast and their inhabitants. Now, if this couldn't get any more complicated, Olmec can also refer to the Olmeca Xicalanga people, who briefly dominated central Mexico during the post classic period. None of these people have any direct connection with the Olmecs that we're going to discuss today, and there are big differences between the ancient Olmec and the historical Olmec. For this reason, some people have proposed an alternate name for Olmec people and culture, the Tenosalome. I personally wish we had a term like ancient or ancestral Olmec to contrast with the later historical Olmec, similar to how we have ancestral Puebloan to differentiate them from their modern Puebloan descendants. But that's just my wishful thinking and not a hill I'm going to die on. In an ideal world, we'd use the name that the ancient Olmec called themselves, but this has sadly not survived. For ease, I'm going to stick with Olmec because that's what scholars and the public at large have traditionally used and continue to use. Just be aware that Olmec can mean different things in different contexts. Next, we need to briefly discuss chronology and where we are in time. Mesoamerican chronology is broadly divided into four main periods: Archaic, Formative, sometimes called Pre-classic, Classic, and Post-classic. Today, we're going to be in the formative period, and this is divided into early, middle, and late stages that begin at 1800 BCE, 1000 BCE, and 400 BCE, respectively. Some chronologies may shift these boundaries a bit, but they'll always employ the same names and more or less cover the same time periods. In this episode, we'll be covering the late Archaic and early formative periods. In the next episode, we'll cover the middle and late formative periods. Lastly, let's discuss geography so we can appreciate where we are in Mesoamerica. The Olmec inhabited the southern Gulf Coast of Mexico, now occupied by the modern states of Veracruz and Tabasco. As we mentioned earlier, this region is often referred to as the Olmen, the land of the Olmecs. The coastline is a mix of salt lagoons, marshes, estuaries, mangroves, and sandbars. Further inland, the Coatzacoalcos and Tonalá river basins form a web of waterways that wind their way through swamps, ridges, and plateaus toward the northern coast. Rainfall and water in the region are abundant, and these rivers and their tributaries often swell during the rainy season between May and November and inundate the countryside before dropping during the dry season in the early spring. This area is hot and humid. While there is some variation by location, temperatures rarely fall below 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius, but rarely get above 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius. While this is great for growing, it also means that preservation is quite poor, and that can make archaeology complicated. To date, only a few Olmec skeletons have been recovered in archaeology. The many rivers in this area provided not only important transportation routes, but were home to stocks of fish, turtles, caimans, waterfowl, and shellfish. Further inland, dense tropical forests covered the uplands, but these have dramatically shrunk over the past several centuries from deforestation and agriculture. To the northwest are the volcanic Tuxtla Mountains, and while this region was never a center of massive Olmec populations, it was important as sources of basalt and clay. This is our Olmec heartland where we'll be spending most of our time. Now let's take a look at the origins of the Olmecs. Hunter gatherers had inhabited Mexico and Central America as far back as the late Pleistocene, but during the Archaic period, they began to rely increasingly on plant resources. This focus eventually resulted in the domestication of plants such as maize, beans, squash, chilies, and avocados, among others. Over time, these domesticates became more and more important to their sustenance. Several archaic sites in the Olmen can give us a glimpse of this. One important site is the site of San Andres in Tabasco, not far from the later capital of La Venta. The site was a coastal lagoon with a large beach ridge to the north. Current archaeological evidence shows that human occupation here goes back to 5100 BCE, and that these people were exploiting the rich aquatic resources of the lagoon. Besides these aquatic animals, the locals were also cultivating early crops. Pollen from sediment cores have shown that during this time, fields were being cleared to aid in their cultivation. Among these were Teosinte, the wild ancestor of maize. This is interesting because Teosinte is not native to the area and had to have been transported here by humans. Wild squash, sunflower, cotton, and manioc were also cultivated as well. Over time, grinding stones made from basalt became more common. Basalt is a hard volcanic rock and crafting material, and it isn't local. It had to be imported. Much of this likely came from the Tuxtla Mountains, and archaic sites can also be found there as well. At Laguna Pampal, east of Laguna Catamaco, sediment cores have shown that people were cultivating crops at 2800 BCE. Prior to the emergence of the Olmec, their heartland was inhabited by egalitarian groups that were slowly adopting agriculture but still exploiting wild foods. Many people have claimed that Olmec origins can be traced to a foreign people. This is an understandable position when you look at the colossal Olmec heads. In fact, you're in pretty esteemed company because the earliest written record of a colossal head that we have comes from Jose Maria Melgar y Serrano in an account published in the Bulletin of the Mexican Society of Geography and Statistics in 1869. He had been traveling through San Andre Tuxtla and had heard reports of a large stone head that had been unearthed by farmhands on a nearby hacienda. As Melgar wrote,
On my arrival at the hacienda, I asked the owner to take me to look at it. We went, and I was struck with surprise. As a work of art, it is without exaggeration a magnificent sculpture. But what astonished me was the Ethiopic type represented. I reflected that there had undoubtedly been Negroes in this country, and that this had been the first epoch of the world.
it's worth remembering that in the middle of the 19th century, the origins of Native Americans were still very much an open and unanswered question. Theories involving ancient transoceanic migrations from the Old World to the New were very much in vogue, so we can cut Melgar some slack here. He was far from alone in this view. From the earliest moments of Olmec archaeology, people have tried to connect the Olmec with not just Africa, but also East Asia and the Near East. It's easy to see why. Many modern people, particularly people north of the Mexican border, don't typically associate these facial features with indigenous Mexican people, but rather with people of African descent, so Melgar's position is understandable. In fact, many serious scholars in the past 150 years have proposed that the Olmec migrated from a foreign land across the ocean and settled in Mexico. Before the 1950s, this wasn't an unusual position. Back then, the Olmecs really stuck out in the archaeological record, and no one knew exactly where they fit in the picture of Mesoamerica. It was as if they popped out of nowhere, and a sudden migration could have explained this. Since then, however, those positions have not stood up to scrutiny. Decades of archaeology have shown that the Olmec developed from archaic cultures in Mesoamerica, and we can trace their cultural development really well. Ceramic sequences show that locals continued making and developing the same pottery from archaic into Olmec times. I don't want this to turn into a debunking video or else we'll be here all day, so I'm going to keep this part broad. I know many will fall back on the idea that the Olmec heads look African or Asian. And I agree with you, at least that far, my imaginary straw man. They do look like that. But those ethnic features are also found among the indigenous people of Veracruz. In fact, it only took me a minute or two of looking at pictures of modern indigenous people in the Olmec heartland to find people with those features, because they're common in many tropical populations all over the world. In 2019, two Olmec skeletons were discovered at the site of San Lorenzo, and they were able to have their DNA analyzed, and the DNA belonged to haplogroup A, like other Native Americans. I realize that this is a small sample size, but it's all that we have, and within it, there's no genetic evidence of recently arrived foreign ancestry. Now, before people accuse me of having some sort of sinister agenda, I do want to acknowledge something. It is entirely possible that Africans, Asians, or people from the Mediterranean could have crossed the ocean. That's not the question at hand. The question is whether it's probable that they did so repeatedly and founded an entirely new culture. In fact, we have compelling archaeological and genetic evidence that people from Polynesia and Greenland did reach the Americas, even if they didn't stick around long enough to leave any detectable cultural impact. The problem is that that same level of evidence doesn't exist in Olmec archaeology to suggest a foreign entrada. There are no foreign archaeological materials in Olmec archaeology, and likewise, there's no Olmec material in archaeology beyond Mesoamerica. Perhaps there is an undiscovered site in Mesoamerica that will prove a foreign encounter someday, and when it does, I will be thrilled to make an episode on it. With that said, let's get back on track. One of the most informative early sites in the Olmen is the incredible site of El Manatee. El Manatee was a ritual site where offerings were deposited into a bog. Normally, depositing artifacts, especially perishable ones, into water would mean almost certain deterioration. But luckily for us, this ain't your ordinary pond. It's a bog, and the anaerobic conditions preserved many of these offerings immaculately. It gives us an incredible window into Olmec ritual development over time. The site was used over several centuries, and there are different layers that date to different times. The earliest deposits at this site date to the dawn of the formative period at 1600 BCE. These early offerings consist of pottery, 40 fine stone axes, hog plum seeds, copal resin, and even the earliest rubber ball ever found in the world. The next layers date from 1500 to 1200 BCE and have highly polished axes made from jade, and rather than being deposited irregularly, they are arranged in flower petal patterns. There are no ceramics, but several rubber balls are included in these deposits. These second phase offerings indicate more formalization. These might be the earliest signs of Olmec ritual anywhere in the Olmen, and we can see it being elaborated as more and more time goes on. There is a final phase at El Manatee, but we'll circle back to that later. So, who were these people making these ritual deposits at El Manatee? It's very likely that these people belonged to a chiefdom or polity headed by a new city in the Coatzacoalcos Basin, San Lorenzo, the first undisputed Olmec city in Mesoamerica. Just so we're clear, San Lorenzo is a modern name. We have no idea what the Olmecs would have called it in antiquity. In a lot of ways, San Lorenzo defies expectations. The site was located on a low plateau surrounded by wetlands and was first settled around 1800 BCE. This was a fantastic site because not only did it give people easy access to fish and other resources such as salt, clay, and bitumen, it was dry and defensible, and all the rivers and streams allowed easy transportation to the surrounding areas. If you're expecting me to talk about the role of maize in the growth of San Lorenzo, you'll be disappointed, because maize agriculture doesn't appear to have played a significant role in its rise. Instead, the folks at San Lorenzo employed mixed strategies and diverse approaches to sustenance. While some crops, such as maize and manioc, were cultivated, they were not as important as we'd expect. In fact, Anne Cyphers, who was the lead archaeologist at San Lorenzo for decades, even stated that maize may never have been a staple crop there. Research over the past few decades has shown that they were subsisting primarily on wild flora and fauna around them, particularly fish, mollusks, turtles, and shellfish. Faunal analysis has confirmed that over 60% of meaty food remains were from fish. Fishing was such an industry that as the city expanded, small artificial islands called islotes were built by locals. On these islotes, they built residential and work structures from which they could catch and process fish and other aquatic animals. These could have been dried and smoked to sustain them through the dry season when the water levels dropped. These subsistence methods provided not only a healthy diet for the inhabitants, but also became the catalyst behind the first Olmec city. 1400 BCE marks a turning point for San Lorenzo. Around that date, the city began to expand and assert its dominance over the basin. Contemporary centers such as Estero Rabon, about 12 kilometers to the west, appear to have taken a back seat in their growth to San Lorenzo. This is when we see the first signs of social stratification, a three-tiered society, and an elite class. This is also when islotes first began to be built, and these are believed to have been built by families or groups to claim rights to certain areas of the floodplains. This likely allowed some families to control highly productive areas and amass surpluses and wealth, and in turn extract labor demands from other people. Exotic materials had already been coming into the city, but that was picking up now. After all, San Lorenzo's location gave its people great access to river trade. Even before San Lorenzo, long distance exchange in obsidian, jade, and basalt had already been taking shape. Remember that some of those early offerings at Almanity included jade. To facilitate and access river trade, they took advantage of topography and constructed causeways to link the growing city to the river. One causeway connected San Lorenzo to the site of El Azuzul, located on the confluence of two waterways, which would have allowed San Lorenzo to control the river traffic. Another causeway was built to connect the site of Potero Nuevo, which likely acted as a wharf for loading and unloading canoes. Perhaps the most impressive building project, however, was the plateau that San Lorenzo occupied. Over several centuries, the people of San Lorenzo transformed it. Over 2 million cubic meters of earth was added to the plateau to level the top. Additional levels were also terraced around it for other residences. In some sections, they had to raise the natural elevation as high as 25 meters, so this wasn't a little landscape project. This was a huge undertaking for the people of San Lorenzo that must have required an incredible amount of labor, coordination, and planning. To put all that another way, that's nearly double the volume of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. The platform also has 10 edge platforms on the eastern and western sides, about 1 to 2.5 meters high, and they were likely sites of elite activity. Takeshi Inomata, in a recent study, has suggested that this may have a link to the sacred calendar, which works on a base 20 system. If this is the case, it may be one of the earliest expressions of the Mesoamerican calendar, but this is very speculative. As we'll see, the center of the plateau top would become the political and ritual center of San Lorenzo for the rest of its history. Now, we're going to take a detour for a moment, because it's easy to look at San Lorenzo's rise and see it as the top student setting the grading curve for the Mesoamerican class. But the real picture is more complicated. While it was a glorious trajectory, there's some interesting developments beyond the heartland that warrant our attention. A very important culture that we need to discuss are the Mokaya from the Soconusco region. While the Mokaya are not the topic of today's video, they have really piqued my interest, and I hope to return to them someday, because right before the Olmec rose, they were making waves. Mokaya is again a modern name that means corn people in Proto-Mishezokian, the language that they are believed to have spoken. Mishezokian is important here because scholars believe that the ancient Olmec also spoke a Mishezokian language too. And if this is true, it likely facilitated exchange and communication between the Olmec and the Mokaya. So, what were the Mokaya doing in the early formative? Let's take a quick look. Between 1900 and 1500 BCE, the Mokaya population was living in many hamlets and larger settlements, the largest of which was Paso de la Amada in the Soconusco in modern day Chiapas. During that time, Paso de la Amada consolidated nearby villages and turned into a premier site. By 1500 BCE, the site had several platform mounds and even had the earliest ball court in Mesoamerica. The largest mound shows evidence of an elite residence, and it was likely the site of important public ceremonies. Early pottery at Mokaya sites is also very revealing. This pottery is among the earliest in all of Mesoamerica, and it's unexpectedly sophisticated and beautiful. I mean, just look at this. These people had high standards from day one. If you've seen our chocolate episode, you'll also know that the Bara phase Mokaya are the earliest chocolate producers and consumers in the world. These elaborate vessels also speak to a culture where feasting was important, and these feasts were likely occasions for local chiefs to enhance their prestige, aggrandize themselves, and show up their competitors. Artifacts made from exotic materials such as jade, mica, and quartz also appear in Mokaya archaeology. This was all happening as San Lorenzo was growing, and there's a good chance the Olmec and Mokaya were communicating with each other. For example, some pottery at San Lorenzo during its early phases has strong similarities to Mokaya pottery. The Mokaya also taught the Olmec how to produce and consume chocolate. Now, before you get too excited, I need to emphasize that the nature of Olmec Mokaya relations is still an open question. Scholars continue to debate the degree and nature of this relationship. More investigation needs to be done to tease all that out, but I think it's safe to say that they played an important and understated role during the formative period in Mesoamerica, one that the Olmec may have taken inspiration from. San Lorenzo hits its apex around 1200 BCE. At this time, it had an estimated population of 12,000 inhabitants, with thousands more living in its hinterland. This would have made it one of the largest cities, if not the largest, in the Western Hemisphere. By now, elites had consolidated power over the area. We can get a good look at the power of the elites by looking at what archaeologists have uncovered in the city center at the plateau top. Back in San Lorenzo's heyday, this would have been something to behold. An entire architectural and monumental program would have greeted visitors. Large thrones, colossal heads, various sculptures of humans and animals carved from exotic basalt would have proclaimed the power of the city's rulers. Also on the plateau summit would have been the homes and palaces of the nobles and rulers. One of the most important discoveries from excavations on the summit is the Red Palace, so called because of the red floor. This was an elite residence with 4-meter high basalt columns supporting a roof. Below the palace, archaeologists also discovered an elaborate water drainage system. One of the most interesting aspects of the Red Palace is that it contained a basalt workshop where many of the sculptures at San Lorenzo were produced or reworked. Workshops like these produced the monumental thrones and colossal heads that decorated the city center and plateau top. This workshop also had many old monuments that were being recarved into new monuments. This shouldn't be too surprising when you consider that these large basalt monoliths had to be moved 50 kilometers from the Tuxtla Mountains. In fact, archaeologist John Clark estimated that transporting a single colossal head or throne would have required the labor of over 1,500 people over a 3 to 4 month period. This was precious material that you could not just get at the store, and sometimes it was way easier to just recycle old monuments. On that note, let's take a look at San Lorenzo's monuments. This is something that really sets San Lorenzo apart from its contemporaries. Other people like the Mochaya may have been building impressive sites and fashioning beautiful pottery, but nobody in Mesoamerica was cranking out stone monuments like the Olmec, so they merit our attention. I know you guys are probably eager to discuss the colossal heads, but I want to actually start with something else for reasons that will become clear soon. Thrones. These are often referred to as altars in the literature, and it's not hard to see why. They look like an altar that you'd find in a church or a temple. However, most archaeologists believe that these also functioned as thrones, because incredibly, we have a surviving depiction of an Olmec ruler on one of these at Axtotitlan Guerrero. The thrones usually depict a human emerging from a niche, perhaps a cave, or the open maw of an earth monster. The figure is often holding a baby with feline characteristics, perhaps recalling a mythological scene. In many Mesoamerican mythologies, the first humans emerged from a cave, and if the Olmec held the same belief, these thrones combined powerful religious symbolism for political ends. Along with these thrones, we have the famous colossal heads. These are probably the most recognizable Olmec artifacts. Even if you have no clue who the Olmec are, you've probably seen pictures of these online or in textbooks. The colossal heads certainly merit the term colossal. They can be taller than 3 meters or 10 feet. They are all carved from solid basalt and range from 4.6 tons to an astonishing 40 tons. They project power and gravity. These portray mature males with fleshy cheeks, broad lips, and flat noses, all features still common in the region among indigenous people today. All of them wear distinctive headdresses and helmets. In fact, some have speculated that these helmets may be ball playing gear. We do know that Olmec elites did participate in the ball game, judging from ball players represented in Olmec art. We also know that later cultures employed the ball game in elite ceremonies. Each face is realistic and unique, and most scholars agree that these are portraits of individual people, likely rulers or important elite figures. We'll see later on that this develops into a ruler cult later in Olmec history. Faint remains of paint suggest that these were once brightly painted like many sculptures in the ancient world. Although Olmec heads are found at several sites, the majority come from San Lorenzo, where they were arranged on the plateau as part of a wider monumental program. When most of these heads, and most of the monuments for that matter, were carved is a bit of a mystery. The archaeological context of these works is such that we can date their abandonment rather than their construction, so it's very difficult to determine when the first ones were carved. Archaeologists can confidently say that they are older than 900 BCE, but we can't say if these were all carved around the same time or if this was part of a tradition that spanned centuries. Interestingly, there's evidence that a few of the colossal heads are actually recarved thrones. Remember that basalt workshop I mentioned earlier? Archaeology has shown that many basalt sculptures were reworked into new pieces, and the colossal heads were no exception. If we look at Colossal Head 7 from San Lorenzo, you can see the head is actually pretty rectangular in profile, and you'll also notice two odd arcs on the headdress band and behind the ear. These are actually the remains of a niche from an altar that was recycled into an Olmec head. Why these were recarved has puzzled archaeologists. On one hand, it could have been an expedient way to get basalt locally instead of transporting it all the way from the mountains. On the other hand, it could have been a political statement by usurpers to erase the legacy of their rivals. We just don't know. Besides thrones and stone heads, the Olmecs of San Lorenzo also created other sculptures from stone, such as human, animal, and hybrid forms. These early pieces are noteworthy for being freestanding, full round works. Some of these are quite striking. A famous set of sculptures comes from El Azuzul. These depict two elite men in headdresses, sometimes called twins, priests, or mediators, that crouch forward grasping ceremonial bars. Originally, these were paired with a jaguar sculpture, and there's a lot of speculation about what this set of sculptures depicts. Some have connected these twins with the hero twins from the Maya creation story, the Popol Vuh. We do know from where they were found that they would have greeted visitors to the site, and they must have made quite an impression. Animals such as jaguars and birds are also depicted in sculpture as well, but the Olmecs are known for their human animal hybrids, particularly human jaguar hybrids, often referred to as were-jaguars. These are characterized by their snarling faces, downturned mouths, and upturned lips, but can have additional feline features as well, such as fangs. Many of these are carved on celts or ceremonial axes. Another good example can be seen in the famous Lord of Las Limas statue, which depicts an Olmec figure cradling a child with those feline features. Before we go any further, I can't resist giving you guys the backstory of the Lord of Las Limas, because it's wild. The Lord of Las Limas was originally discovered in 1965 by two children at Las Limas looking for a stone to crack open palm nuts. They subsequently alerted their parents to the discovery. After digging it up, the family believed it to be a miraculous statue of the Virgin Mary and infant Jesus, and they placed it in their house and began to venerate the matron of Las Limas. It wasn't long before the rest of the village joined in. Word about this miraculous statue soon got out, and a neighboring village even borrowed it for the festival of the Virgin del Carmen, where it was adorned with flowers and a silk cape. This was so revered that they even moved the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe on their altar so that it could share the altar with the matron of Las Limas, since, in their paraphrased words, she was more important because she was older. Well, they were right about the age, but wrong about the identity. And when archaeologists got wind of it and went to see it, they realized that this matron was actually a lord, and that it wasn't a new saint, but a masterpiece of Olmec art. After presumably getting the whole "that belongs in a museum" spiel, the village agreed to part with the statue on the conditions that the state build them a new school, resolve a long standing land dispute, and display the statue in a public museum. Their demands were met, and the Lord of Las Limas was installed in the Jalapa Museum of Anthropology. Also, when the children who discovered the statue visited the museum to see it, they got a well deserved standing ovation from the crowd that was viewing it. Super cool. But wait, there's actually more, because in 1970, the statue was stolen from the museum in the middle of the night by thieves who tried to sell it on the black market. That may have been the last anyone saw of it, except that it was later recovered in a motel room in San Antonio, Texas. It's likely the thieves were unable to sell such a high profile item and abandon it. Must have been a very memorable day for the motel staff, and once it was rediscovered, it was returned to the Jalapa Museum of Anthropology, where it resides to this day. With that very necessary story out of the way, there's another reason why the Lord of Las Limas statue is important. This work gives us a peek into Olmec religion. It has four religious symbols carved on it that are believed to depict Olmec deities. Among them are what scholars call the Olmec dragon, the bird monster, the fish monster, and the banded eyed god. But who are these deities? To answer that, we need to discuss Olmec beliefs and religion. But where and how can we start a religious investigation about a culture so ancient that didn't leave us any religious texts? In Olmec studies, there's a term called the continuity hypothesis, which scholar Peter Gerelman defines as thus: there is a basic religious system common to all Mesoamerican peoples. This system took shape long before it was given monumental expression in Olmec art and survived long after the Spanish conquered the New World's major political and religious centers. Now, if one assumes that this hypothesis is true, scholars can project later religious concepts that we have good documentation of back into the past onto earlier cultures. Admittedly, this is quite speculative. Even proponents of this are aware that meanings behind religious symbols and motifs may have changed, and that historical belief systems may be much different from those 2,500 years earlier. That said, however, with careful application, it's yielded some interesting results. Several deities have been identified in Olmec iconography. Peter Gerelman lists them as the Olmec dragon, the Olmec bird monster, the fish monster, the banded eye god, the water god, the maze god, the were jaguar, and the feathered serpent. We aren't going to discuss all of these, but I do think a few are worth highlighting. The Olmec dragon is often depicted as the earth monster in crocodilian form. He's typically featured with flame eyebrows, a bulbous nose, an elongated upper jaw, and a bifurcated tongue. Many theorize that this deity had a role in the Olmec creation story. The maize god is depicted with a cleft in the top of his head, from which plants sprout. This cleft on the head is often incorporated into the costumes and ornaments of Olmec rulers. The water god is usually depicted as a chubby dwarf or child with a were-jaguar face, and also appears on a lot of Olmec artifacts, especially on celts, figurines, and portable objects, although we've also seen a few examples of him on monumental sculptures. Many scholars have tried to tie different deities to later gods, and the water god is often referred to as an early form of Tlaloc or Chaac. Miguel Covarrubias actually made a famous chart of Mesoamerican rain and water deities that he traced back to this Olmec water god. The presence of the maize and water gods show that agriculture was becoming more important, and their iconography was often co opted by Olmec nobles. If you're curious about the feathered serpent, we'll come back to him later because he's still a few centuries away at this point. Another aspect of Olmec religion that is often highlighted by scholars is shamanism. In cultures that practice shamanism, shamans commune with the spiritual world through various entheogens, or trance practices, and are often said to transform into animals. In the case of the Olmecs, the were-jaguar imagery is often interpreted as shamans transforming into jaguars as they enter the spirit world to intercede for their people. Beyond the typical were-jaguars, there are also depictions of people at different stages of this transformation. Interestingly, bones of cane toads have been found at San Lorenzo. This toad is inedible, but the venom in its parathyroid gland is psychoactive, so perhaps Olmec shamans were using the venom to induce shamanic trances. I'll spare you the toad licking jokes. There's also an increasing ceremonial sophistication that emerges as Olmec culture develops, and we can see this if we briefly return to El Manatee. That last phase of El Manatee that we mentioned earlier dates to 1200 to 1000 BCE, during San Lorenzo's Golden Age, and this is when we see the richest and most sumptuous offerings. During this phase, offerings of axes, hematite balls, wood scepters, wooden busts, pectorals, and earrings were deposited. Some of these were made in offering bundles, which were carefully wrapped and treated specially. Pottery from these offerings has also tested positive for cacao residue, which means that chocolate drinking had taken on a ritual importance for the Olmec elites. Unfortunately, these offerings may also show the macabre introduction of human sacrifice. Bones of children have been recovered in these layers, and it's possible that these were sacrificed as part of rituals associated with fertility, although there's some debate about whether these were sacrificed or simply interred. In fact, it's likely the springs of El Manatee made it a sacred site, and it's not alone in this regard. The nearby site of La Merced also has ritual offerings that were deposited over a long period of time. Another important site can be found at the top of San Martin Pahapan volcano. Remains of a small shrine at the summit with this beautiful statue was discovered in the early 20th century. You can already see the similarities between this figure and the ones we saw earlier at El Azuzul. Like those, he wears an elaborate headdress and clasps a bar that may represent the Axis Mundi, or world tree. Taken all together, these show that the Olmec maintained a vibrant system of beliefs that they expressed in their artwork and in their ceremonies. At this point, I want to pull the camera back a bit and look at the wider Olmen and San Lorenzo's relationship with the world around it. San Lorenzo was not an Olmec beacon in the wilderness, but the center of a large, sophisticated Olmec network. Elsewhere in the Coatzacoalcos Basin, sites such as Estero Rabon, El Romalino, Las Limas, and Loma del Zapote were all important secondary centers. These sites did not have the same political scheme or leadership structure as San Lorenzo, and probably ran their day to day affairs differently. Archaeology has shown that smaller sites beyond San Lorenzo's hinterland had a lot of independence and could build and maintain their own connections with other societies inside and outside the Olmen. To the east, in the Tonala and Metzcalapa Basin, small settlements were also starting to take shape, but we'll focus on that area in part 2. To the east, near the Tuxtla Mountains, Laguna de los Cerros emerged as an important site that has yielded many monuments. Laguna de los Cerros likely played a role in sourcing basalt to San Lorenzo and the nearby site of Llano de Jicaro, which has the remains of many unfinished monuments and was likely a monument workshop. There's debate about San Lorenzo's relationship with Laguna de los Cerros. Some have speculated that this may have been a San Lorenzo outpost. Others suggest that the site was independent but formed close links with San Lorenzo, which weakened over time. As we mentioned earlier, the Olmen, while abundant in certain resources, is poor in others, and the Olmecs had to find way to source these exotic resources. Archaeology at San Lorenzo and other centers show that they maintained an extensive trade network. However, we should keep in mind that the Olmecs were not the creators nor exclusive users of these routes. Many areas of Mesoamerica were exchanging goods and ideas during this time, and even earlier. The Olmec were not directors of early formative exchange, but rather very successful participants. As we already mentioned, basalt was transported from the Tuxtla Mountains. Obsidian was brought to San Lorenzo from sources nearly 400 kilometers away in the Guatemalan highlands, and also from Puebla. Jade and serpentine that were used for celts and ceremonial items were also traded from Guatemala. Iron ore that the Olmec used to make polished mirrors was brought in from Oaxaca. While the Olmecs had easy access to marine shells from the Gulf Coast, archaeology has detected several types of shells from the Pacific coast too. Perhaps the weirdest item the Olmecs traded for was ilmenite from Chiapas. Ilmenite is a slightly magnetic iron ore that the Olmecs fashioned into small cubes with 3 holes. What were these used for? Beats me, but there's lots of colorful theories. They are truly the Roman dodecahedron of Mesoamerica. Dr. Ed Barnhart has a much more detailed breakdown on this question that I'll link below in case you want to go down that rabbit hole. What San Lorenzo and its contemporaries exported in return for these has not preserved well in the archaeological record, but may have included pottery, feathers, rubber, and cacao. But perhaps the most potent export was the Olmec's ideology and iconography. As San Lorenzo rose to prominence, Olmec-style art began to appear outside of the Olmen. In the Soconusco, Olmec-style pottery, iron ore mirrors, and ceramic figurines have been recovered from many early formative settlements. In the Valley of Oaxaca, Olmec motifs also appear in pottery at contemporary sites in the valley. Even as far away as the Valley of Mexico, Tlatilco pottery with Olmec iconography has been excavated from tombs. To be clear, this was locally made pottery decorated with Olmec motifs, and this shows that Olmec ideas and aesthetics were traveling far and wide. These goods likely lent their owners a special degree of prestige, although we can't know with certainty if they viewed those motifs the same way that the Olmec did. Ultimately, such exchange benefited the Olmec as much as it did foreign leaders and groups. Another interesting piece of Olmec influence can be seen in the platform of San Lorenzo itself. Recent LiDAR studies have shown that other sites during the formative period in the Ulman and Maya area also created similar artificial platforms with similar features. Perhaps the most famous example is the site of Aguada Phoenix in Tabasco, near the Guatemalan border. This was built between 1000 and 800 BCE and has similar dimensions and the same 20 edge platforms as San Lorenzo. This is often referred to as a Maya site, but there's been a lot of recent discussion about whether this site is more Olmec or Maya. The jury is still out on that question. Nevertheless, it shows how the people living in that area took inspiration from San Lorenzo when they planned out their city. After 1200 BCE, things began to change at San Lorenzo. One very noticeable thing is new settlement patterns and an increase in maize remains in the archaeological record. People were increasingly settling in upland areas around the site where residents could focus on agriculture rather than the mixed economy from earlier. This also coincides with an emptying of the wet lowland areas. The people of San Lorenzo had built much of their success on the natural bounty of the river basin, and this suggests that things were changing. Along with this, certain economic activities such as obsidian and bitumen processing moved out of the city to the newer settlements, away from any potential elite influence and meddling. One could see this as the people putting both literal and figurative distance between themselves and the ruling class. So, how did the elites respond to these changes? They ratcheted up their game. Recall that the last phases at Almanati also showed new, more elaborate ceremonies being developed that may have involved human sacrifice. Another sign that things were changing is the decline of chocolate drinks in the archaeological record, while maize based drinks like chicha became more prevalent. Monumental construction may have gone into overdrive as well. In fact, scholars like Philip Arnold have suggested that San Lorenzo's apogee of monument construction occurred in its final 2 centuries, as elites made increasingly extravagant displays of their wealth and power to retain followers and shore up support. This may have destabilized the politics at San Lorenzo and created greater demands on the populace. Michael Coe and Richard Deal have pointed out that many sculptures recovered at San Lorenzo show signs of mutilation that may have been politically motivated. Other factors may have put pressure on San Lorenzo as well. And Cyphers has theorized that eruptions in the Tuxtla volcanoes may have not only covered the region with ash, but also changed the river courses, which in turn had devastating impacts for San Lorenzo's exchange networks. We could speculate all day on the exact causes, but the consequences are clear. People began to leave the area. Elite culture dried up. Fewer and fewer luxury goods were imported. This is likely when Laguna de los Cerros may have broken away from San Lorenzo's grip, but that glory would have been short lived because it declined rapidly after 1000 BCE. By 900 BCE, San Lorenzo was in free fall and would eventually be reduced to a small village, living in the shell of a former great city. It would limp on until 400 BCE, when it was completely abandoned, though it would be briefly reoccupied during the Classic period. Across San Lorenzo's hinterland, the population dropped by an estimated 92%. This depopulation wasn't unique to San Lorenzo. It occurred all over the Coatzacoalcos and San Juan basins. Other centers like Las Limas and La Oaxaqueña were similarly reduced. Estero Rabon lost two-thirds of its population. Now, don't get the idea that these people were being wiped out by some kind of catastrophe. Instead, they were moving to greener pastures. New large settlements were being created outside the basins. To the west, in the central Tuxtlas, many large villages emerged around 1000 BCE. More impressive, however, was the growth in the Tonalá River basin to the east, where a new giant was rising: La Venta. Olmec culture wasn't finished. Rather, it was entering its next great phase. But that's going to have to wait until our next video, the Olmec Golden Age. And for now, we're going to wrap this up for today. Special thanks to my patrons listed here. You guys are the best. If you would like to join the ranks of these fine individuals and support the show, you can do so on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and follow us on Facebook. Take care, and we'll see you in our next episode.